Hello, and welcome to the blue portion of my Outlaws at Thunder Junction limited set review. Today we're going to be talking about the blue cards and how good I think they're going to be in OTJ. Um, that's basically the whole deal. If you haven't been here before, this is the way that I do my tiers. Essentially, there are 5 tiers. Tier 1 is good, Tier 5 is bad. It's a little bit different maybe than the way that some other people do it. But if you haven't seen it before, this is kind of just a little bit of a general description of what the tiers sort of mean. It's kind of loose, but, you know, again, 1's good, 5's bad. And we're just going to get right into it with Archmage's Newt here. 1 and a blue for a 2/2. It is a mount. When it deals combat damage to a player, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gets flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. It instead has flashback 0. Instead, if this was saddled, and it has saddle for 3. So this card has numerous problems. And at the end of the day, it's kind of just like a 2-draw, like it's just kind of like pretty medium. It might even be like tier 4. Like I don't think this is super great or anything. The upside is somewhat high of, you know, giving your spell flashback, and I think there are like enough redeeming qualities of this being like there's just like enough going on here that I'm like, okay, I'll bump it up to tier 3. But I think at the end of the day, this is really mostly just a 2-mana 2/2, like kind of in disguise here. And that's not especially where you want to be these days. Unlimited, and so yeah, I mean, I've put it in tier 3. I think it's fairly average. Canyon Crab, 1 and a blue for an 0/5. It has +1, 1 and a blue to give it +2/-2 until end of turn. At the beginning of your end step, if you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, draw a card and then discard a card. So blue and white have this not casting spells during your turn thing. And this is an okay, nice little like payoff for that. It does kind of, you know, help filter your draws and whatnot and allow you to sort of, whatever, it gives you a reward for doing that. The issue I have with this card is that it's pretty, you know, tough to see this being good. Now, if it were a 1/4, I'd definitely be more interested. It being an 0/5, it's just like you're not sure you can block a 1/1, but you're not blocking a 1/1 in the same way that a 1 power creature blocks. You know what I mean? And it is a pretty key difference when your opponent is allowed to attack into this and your opponent can't attack into like a 1/4 or something like that. Just zero power blockers just aren't very good. Like they just because the thing about limited is not necessarily that you are actually blocking a lot. It's the fact that you're threatening to block is kind of like what you want to be doing. Like this card doesn't threaten to block. It's like actually blocking is kind of bad in limited, and you like mostly should try not to do it. Threatening to block is very good. It's kind of this like weird. It's an interesting like sort of conceptual thing, but yeah, this card does not threaten to block very well, which is why I'm not a huge fan of it. But I do think it's like kind of okay and does work thematically with kind of what's going on in blue-white, a color pair that I'm not super excited about, but we shall see. Daring Thunder Thief, 3 and a blue for a 4/4 with flash. It enters the battlefield tapped. Look at this, very simple design. You don't see these every day anymore. So a 4-mana 4/4 flat, like a 4-mana 4/4, just like generally, is not super exciting these days. In blue, it would be significantly above what they usually get, especially with flash. Obviously, this works with the theme of not playing spells on your turn. Again, my expectations for that theme are pretty low. I think you want to be able to play not being able to play your spells when you want to is concerning to me. So yeah, and also this just seems like what do we do? Like you're flashing in a 4 day, like essentially you're taking turn 4 off, right? You know, your opponent doesn't know that, but you know, this can't block on turn 4. It can't attack. It's just not threatening to do anything. It kind of just is there. And like a 4-mana 4/4 that doesn't block when it comes down is pretty bad, and that concerns me quite a bit. Deepmuck Desperado, it's a Homerid. 2 and a blue for a 2/4. When you commit a crime, each opponent mills 3 cards. This ability triggers only once each turn. So I'm not a big fan of this. There's not really that much mill support in the set. I wanted to put it in tier 5, but I was like, all right, well, it is a 3 mana 2/4, but it is probably actively bad for you to be milling your opponents in this format, especially if if they have green or black cards in their deck. So like, you know, a significant 60% of the decks, right? You know, it's just not great, right? To be bad, but you know, sometimes it's okay, and it is a 2/4. It is also an outlaw, so it's like fine, but like not good. I'm not expecting to ever put this in my deck. Djinn of the Fool's Fall. 4 and a blue for a 4/3 with flying, and plot for 3 and a blue. So this is an instance of plot being cheaper than the cost. I don't hate this card as a 5-drop, but again, so like 5-drops on the tier list sort of artificially are sort of a tier lower than other cards, just anything that costs 5 or more mana, because you can't play very many of them, so their value above replacement just is lower. This kind of falls into that category of cards where it's like, yep, you can play this card in your deck, it's okay, but I'm not excited about it, and it is expensive, so yeah. Don't completely hate it, but not excited either. Double Down, 3 and a blue for an enchantment. When you cast an outlaw spell, copy that spell. You know, the more I've seen of this set, there are a lot of outlaws. Like, there is a high number of outlaws. I still think this card is very bad, because every version of it we've ever seen has been bad. 4 mana don't do anything tends to just not be good enough. And like, so the first outlaw spell that you copy has to be 4 mana value or bigger for this card to have been even like breaking even on value, right? Even to just be like, okay, well, I at least got my card back. You have to cast something that's 4 mana value or bigger, and it's just not gonna happen that often. And like, if you get 2 spells off it, that's great. You got your value, you did the thing, but it's just, you know, these effects are just way too slow usually. And also, blue is not the outlaw color, so there are obviously outlaws, but it's not primarily what it's doing. Duelist of the Mind. 1 and a blue for a star to 3 flying vigilance is equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn. When you commit a crime, you may draw a card. If you do discard a card, this ability triggers only once each turn. Yeah, I mean, I'm not super excited about this. On your turn, it kind of attacks as like a base, you know, it's a 1/3 with vigilance and flying, which is good, but on your opponent's turn, it's a 0/3 blocker. Not great. It's not great, and like, if you, yes, committing a crime grows it, but, you know, you could, like, again, sort of with the threatening to block idea, like, this doesn't actually do a great job of threatening to block anything. It just kind of sits there. I think it's fine. I think it's decent. I don't think it's anything special. I could be proven wrong about this. This may be stronger than it sort of reads to me, but I'm certainly not super excited about it. Emergent Haunting. 1 and a blue for an enchantment at the beginning of your end step. If you haven't cast a spell from your hand this turn, and this isn't a creature, it becomes a 3/3 spirit creature with flying. This is a very interesting card. It also has the ability to pay 2 and a blue to surveil 1, so it kind of curves into itself, which is very nice. And it doesn't lose that ability when it becomes a creature, by the way. You can just keep paying it, even if it's a creature. So you still have that ability in the late game, which is nice. You're never going to complain about that. And yeah, on turn 2, it's not amazing, right? Like, it is going to not block for 2 turns, so, you know. Or for 1 turn, really. It's not blocking on turn 3. If you pass on turn 3, then it's not blocking, but you do need to be spending your mana. This does give you a way to spend your mana, which is nice. So the worst case scenario is you're, you know, taking turn 3 off to scry 1 and make a 3/3 flyer, which is honestly a pretty good deal. But you are, you know, missing out on your 2-drop or 3-drop to do that, which isn't great. But I still think this card's solid. Like, you're just getting a lot of rate for 2 mana, and there does seem to be a decent amount of ways to spend your mana on your opponent's turn, and also to just like take 1 turn off and you'll have something to do, you know, at some point during the game. You don't necessarily have to flip this on 3. but obviously it gets better the earlier you transform it. Failed Fording. 1 and a blue for an instant, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand if you control a desert, surveil 1. So we just saw this in MKM. Essentially, that only hit creatures, I believe, and this hits non-land permanents, which is an upgrade, but not super meaningful. It increases its hit rate of things that actually matter from like, it hits, 90% of the things that you want to hit to like 95% of the things you want to hit or something like that. It's not a huge upgrade. Control, and then like the fact that you have to control a desert to surveil 1 is largely downside, although I do think that a lot of the decks that I'm going to be drafting past week 1, I don't think I'm going to be drafting a lot of deserts in week 1, but I think that, as the format goes on, I'm going to be drafting a lot of desert-based decks that are like green, because I think that deck is going to be very good. Not week 1. Week 1, obviously, there's going to just be the 2 color pairs are just going to be too open week 1 to be drafting those decks and have them be the best deck, but over time, I do think those decks are going to be very, very good. Fibblethip, Lost on the Range. 1 blue for a 1/1 with Ward 2. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. The top card of your library has Plot. The Plot cost is equal to its mana cost. You may plot non-land cards from the top of your library. So this card, every time I read this card, I think less of it. It is a 3-mana 1/1, which is truly awful. I honestly, I'm thinking about moving it to tier 5. It's still pipped. The saving grace that it has is that it is kind of like a card that your opponent does want to deal with and can, in some rare situations, take over the game. I think for the most part, though, that this card is pretty bad. It's basically a pure card advantage, and if you think about this card, it's kind of worse than if it just said draw a card on it. Like if this was just 1 blue 1/1 Ward 2 draw a card, would that be better or worse than this card? And I'm like, it's kind of close. I don't think that card was very good. That card would be like tier 4. So that's kind of where I put this. The upside is of course very high, but the situation where the upside takes place is so infrequent that I just can't see this being very good at all, to be honest with you. Fleeting Reflection. 1 and a blue for an instant. Target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. Untap that creature until end of turn. It becomes a copy of up to 1 other target creature. So we've seen, it's a hexproof effect. I don't know, I might be underrating this. It is one of those, we've seen the pure hexproof that doesn't leave a lasting effect cards to be pretty bad, especially when they're 2 mana. Yes, I understand that this makes your creature into another creature, but the problem is that most of the time your opponent is targeting your best creature with removal. So essentially you're protecting the best creature, and you're like, well, I guess I'm just going to leave it as the creature that it was because it was already the best creature I had. So in some cases that's not true, but I think in a lot of cases it is going to be true. This technically is a crime, by the way. It is targeting. You can target one of your opponent's creatures and commit a crime using this. I think it's literally the worst way to commit a crime in the entire set, but it is certainly, I don't know, I'm just not interested in this. I don't, there's Snakeskin Veil is in the set. Snakeskin Veil just dunks on this super hard, so not interested. Geralf the Fleshwraith. 2 and a blue for a 2/3 when you cast a spell during your turn, other than the first spell that you cast during that turn, create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token. Whenever a zombie enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each other zombie that entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So this is doing some sweet stuff. Obviously with plot, you can plot something and then play this and then put plot thing and then you play something else and whatever. It does get out of hand extremely quickly, but it also does need support, and it is 3 mana 2/3, so again, I've bumped it out of tier 1 for those reasons, but I still think it's a good card. I just don't think it's premium. Generally cards that don't enable themselves are going to sort of be in this tier 2 category instead of tier 1 because of, it needs a little bit of help, and you need to cast 2 spells. And this needs to not die, and there is good removal in the set. Geyser Drake. 2 and a blue for a 2/3 flyer. As long as it's not your turn spells, you cast cost 1 less to cast. So this is this is a big upgrade over the card from Theros Beyond Death, the Naiad, I think, or the whatever. Anyways, it was an enchantment creature that was a 2/3 that didn't have fly, and it gave your non-creature spells, reduced the cost of your non-creature spells, and that card was actually pretty serviceable. It was a decent card in that format. I expect this card to be decent. It is a flyer. It is doing things that you want to be doing in this color. You know, reducing every single spell's cost is significant. It is something that, you know, can add up, right? Like if this even generates like 1 mana for you, you're gonna be pretty happy about it. And playing a 3 mana 2/3 flyer is pretty low opportunity cost. It's fine. It's not great or anything, but it's fine. Harrier Strix. Single blue mana for a 1/1 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, tap target permanent, and you can pay 2 and a blue to loot. So, I really like the art style, by the way. But I also like this card. I was conflicted about it because it's like, how am I going to rate this? Am I underrating it or am I overrating it, right? It is a way to commit a crime, which is good in blue decks. It is also a 1/1 flyer for 1, which recently has not been very good when it doesn't have some, you know, additional impact, which this does, although I do think like tapping something, like playing this on 1 is not amazing. So that's kind of the problem, right? 1 mana for 1/1 flyer is not good anymore, at least in my opinion. I've found that when my opponent just goes 1 mana 1/1 flyer, like, that's not great. Now this one is a little bit different because it does allow you to loot with the mana, and like it allows you to have a way to spend your mana, but this just isn't on your turn. I can see this being pretty premium, but I also don't want to start it, you know, like too high, because I do fear for. But it also allows you to double spell in the mid game, which is actually a relevant theme in blue. So let's do a lot of things. Do I want to put it into tier 2? Alright, after much deliberation, I've decided to leave it in tier 3. I don't know, it does a lot of good things. I like this card a lot, but I'm wary of putting it too high, I guess. Jace Reawakened. Blue for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. You can't cast this spell during your first 3 turns of the game. Draw a card. If it has 2+1s, draw a card, then discard a card, or you may plot a card with mana value 3 or less from your hand, and it has a -6 until end of turn. Whenever you cast a spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. This looks alright to me. It is decent, like, sort of value engine. It's, you know, cheap. It allows you to double spell in the mid game, which is good. It can get you. It doesn't protect itself, but it can get you a lot of value. It doesn't protect itself, but again, it leaves itself open. Like, 2 mana is so flexible that you can have ways to protect it with the other 2 mana that you have on turn 4. Fairly feasible to just conceive of a reality where that's possible. I think this card's going to be okay. Do I think it's probably going to be a little overdrafted? Probably, but I think it's going to be good and you know, decent enough. But certainly not, I don't think, broken or anything. At least in limited. I think it constructed, you know, we'll see. Jailbreak Scheme. Single blue for a spree. You can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature that can't be blocked this turn, and you can also you can pay 3 to do that, and you can also pay 2 to put target artifact or creature on the top or bottom of its owner's library. Someday they will power creep this ability by enabling the person who casts it to choose whether it goes on the top or bottom. I think they have already printed cards like that, but I want them to do it again because it's more fun. Yeah. It's you know, this card seems okay to me. Like these type of effects, like sorcery speed interaction, but like there's like upside here that you can pay 6 mana to, you know, put something on top or bottom, and then also like one of your things gets bigger. Seems kind of like okay. I don't know. I'm not super excited about it, but I'm also not, I don't hate it that much. Loan Shark. 3 and a blue for a 3/4. When it enters the battlefield, if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn, you draw a card. You can plot it for 3 and a blue. So, this works. This is a nice card because it works on both ends of plotting, where you plot something on 3 and then you cast this on that into this on 4, or you can plot this on 4 and then cast this something into this on turn 5. Yeah, I don't know. It looks pretty good to me. It is going to be drawing a card a lot. You're going to be, of course, able to double spell. It's like a part of the thing. I am a little concerned about the price tag. It is 4 mana. Like, I guess the sort of the joke is that like you're not always going to want to play this on 4 because you just sometimes are going to want to play a 3-drop, but then you can just play this on 5 because you plotted on 4. But you're giving up a decent amount of tempo to do that. Giving up a lot of resources to plot this card. But perhaps it's alright. I think it's going to be fine. It may end up being slightly better than this. It might be a 2/2 card, but I don't think it's like, again, 4 mana spells, not at a premium generally. Marauding Sphinx. 3 blue for a 3/5 flying vigilance ward 2. Whenever you commit a crime, surveil 2. This ability triggers only once each turn. Yeah, I mean this looks fine. It's a big flying thing that is somewhat resilient. I don't love it, but again, for a 5-drop, it seems kind of okay. Like rewards you for committing crimes, which you're going to be doing to a certain degree. Surveil 2 is nice. Does vigilance. Does block pretty well. So, I don't know. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. Metamorphic Blast. So it's a single blue spree instant. Until end of turn, target creature becomes a white rabbit with base power and toughness 0/1. And it also has a +3 for target player to draw 2 cards. So, I actually like this card quite a bit. We've seen the 2 mana, polymorph thing be not amazing. And it's 4 mana instant draw 2 cards, which isn't very good either. So neither of these modes is very good, but the versatility of having both of them together is kind of nice because you do sort of want them in different situations, and like when the effect of making your opponent's thing a 0/1 is good, it's very good, and when the effect is bad, you just are happy to just draw 2 cards in the mid to late game. So I guess this is decent. It kind of covers all its bases. Like, I don't think you're going to be casting this for both modes especially often, but I think it will come up sometimes, and I think it's a totally reasonable card. Nimble Brigand. 2 and a blue for a 1/3. It can't be blocked if you've committed a crime this turn, and when it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So it is an upgraded Scroll Thief. Scroll Thief isn't very good, and there's a reason for that, and the reason is that a 1/3 doesn't attack very well. Yeah, so this still doesn't attack very well, but it can get in because you can commit crimes. But I'm still not inspired. Like, stats matter, and this not having the stats is problematic. And you can't, as much as committing a crime is going to be something you're going to be doing a lot, you can't always guarantee it. And not being able to block with your 3-drop is going to cause you to take 4 damage ish on average. So it's not a great place to be. Outlaw Stitcher. 3 and a blue for a 1/4. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 2/2 blue and black zombie rogue creature token and put 2+1/+1 counters on it for each spell you've cast this turn other than the first, and it has plot for 4 and a blue. So I don't think you're going to plot this that often, but I mean, this card's just got a lot of rate going on, right? It's just, it's a 3 mana 1/4 that comes with a 2/2, which by itself would be like almost a tier 2 card. It would be borderline between tier 3 and tier 2, but in blue specifically, I think it would be close to tier 2. Just making 2 bodies on 4, one of them that is, pretty defensive and can block well, and the other one that is, it kind of blocks well in many ways, is nice. and that's the base case with this card. And the upside is you know plot something on 3 and you cast that plus this on 4, and then you're working with a 4/4 and a 1/4 on turn 4, which is just absurd. And then also the thing you plotted may have had some extra effects. Like just seems like a really strong card to me. Peerless Rope Master, 4 and a blue for a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, return up to one target tapped creature to its owner's hand. Yeah, this is terrible. 5 mana 4/4 bounce a creature would be decent, but the fact that it has to be tapped is just really atrociously bad, because it kind of doesn't solve any of your problems. Like, you want your Man of War to be able to bounce your opponent's creature to enable an attack for you. This does not do that, because the opponent's creature has already attacked you, and you're playing this on like defense, and the 5 mana 4/4 is not great on defense. And it's like a tempo card that doesn't actually generate you any tempo, and it's not like a value card because it's understated and just doesn't really provide a lot. It doesn't do anything. It does nothing. It does have really cool armor though, so like there's some cool armor going on. I don't know. Anyways, Phantom Interference. So it's another single blue instant spree card. You can pay an additional 3 to create a 2/2 spirit creature token with flying, and you can pay an additional 1 to counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. I love this card. This card looks great to me. Yeah, I generally like the Quench variants. They've kind of found that this seems to be what they want to be doing with blue. It's like a 2 mana counter spell. It's a good place to be. And this one just has enormous upside. Like in the mid game, your 2 mana counter spell doesn't do anything anymore. That's fine. Make a 2/2 flyer. Not great, but again, just the flexibility is really, really good. And sometimes, on turn 5, you hold this up, and your opponent casts their 5-drop, and you make a flyer and counter it, and you win the game when you do that. So, just that upside alone happening, some percentage of the time is going to be really, really good. It does not play, I think part of the reason they juiced this card so much is it doesn't play well with plot, obviously. If you really don't want to just be holding this up on turn 2 if you have a 2-drop. It is like less of a 2-drop in this format than it is in some formats, again because of plot just negating this ability. So you do have to be a little bit careful, but just the flexibility seems so good to me that I think it should perform despite having the set mechanic restrictions applied to it. Plan the Heist. 2 blue for a sorcery. Surveil 3 if you have no cards in hand, and then draw 3 cards, and you can plot it for 3 and a blue. So it's Harmonize. They color shifted Harmonize. How dare they? You're ruining the color pie and etc. and etc. Obvious meme, but the Surveil 3 if you have no cards in hand is just not something that comes up as often as you would like, and I don't. So the reason to plot this card is that you don't have 2 blue mana. That's the reason to plot this card. There's not really another good reason to plot this card, unless your opponent's holding up mana and you're worried about running into a counter spell. The plot has applications here, but they're pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. Generally, if you're gonna pay 4 mana to draw 3 cards, you want to just do it and get it over with. So, you want to have the 3 cards as soon as possible. Plotting doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense in that regard. If you have the mana to just cast it, you should probably just be casting it. But again, there are some niche applications. If you really want to do double spell stuff, this can enable you to do that. And there you go. Razzle Dazzler. 1 and a blue for a 1/2, and you cast your second spell on each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it can't be blocked this turn. So unfortunately, this card is really understated, and double spelling on turn 3 is extremely difficult. Obviously, if you go turn 2 Razzle Dazzler into turn 3 Razzle Dazzler plus 1-drop, you're kind of doing it. But even at that point, you've made 2 2-mana 2/3s with and you have 3 cards left in hand. It's not a great place to be. It's just not a great place to be, because it's just not high impact enough. Like a 2-mana 2/3 is not, even if you do this once, it's not good enough. So you need to do it twice for it to be good, and then it's just not feasible. Seize the Secrets. 2 and a blue for a sorcery. It costs 1 less to cast if you've committed a crime this turn, and you draw 2 cards. So this is just upgraded divination. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, like the thing is about divination is the reason it's bad is not that you want it to be slightly cheaper later on in the game, right? Obviously, double spelling with it does help. Like, I think obviously this is better than divination. The problem is, it doesn't really get the benefit of being, you know, like 2 mana until turn 4, which is you can double spell with it on turn 4, and that is good. But I just worry about the fact that like committing a crime is something that is a more aggressive mechanic. It can be done whenever, but it is, I think, leans a little bit more aggressively. Interacting with your opponent's stuff is something you're sort of going to want to be doing. I don't know. I just, you know, pure card draw rate gets rated pretty low until, you know, the format characteristics like define differently. But if the format turns out to be slow and like about this, it'll be good. But I think the format is probably pretty likely to be board centric, and this card gets a lot worse as a result. Shackle Slinger. 2 and a blue for a 3/2. When you cast your second spell each turn, choose target creature an opponent controls. If it's tapped, put a stun counter on it, otherwise tap it. So this is like really medium in my eyes. Like, it looks okay. It is going to be really, really nice to, you know, put a stun counter on your opponent's thing that attacked you and then just be like, yep, you're just never done tapping this. That's pretty sick, but for the most part, it's kind of like it's like sneakily, very eerily similar to a 3 mana 3/2 with no additional text on it, and that does not inspire a lot of hope in the card being good. Shifting Grift. 2 blue for a spree sorcery. You can pay an additional 2 colorless mana to exchange control of 2 target creatures. You can pay 1 additional to exchange 2 artifacts or 2 enchantments. Yeah, don't give your opponent stuff. End of story. Don't do this. Slickshot Lockpicker. 2 and a blue for a 2/3 when it enters the battlefield. Target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. Plot for 2 and a blue. So this card I've kind of gone back and forth on. So it is a plot 3 card. There are several cards in this set on turn 4 that reward you for double spelling. And so plot 3 is kind of an inherent, like on your 3-drop is kind of an inherently valuable thing to have. The problem is that, I don't know, maybe there's no problem. Maybe this is just good and I should just ignore it. You never want to play this on 3. It's a 3 mana spell. You don't want to play it on 3, but at least you can plot it on 3. So you're spending your mana productively in a way that like is setting up for another turn. Your opponent is just kind of never getting out from under this. They just are eventually... You know what? I'll move it up to tier 2. Hold on. So again, I moved it up to tier 2. I think it's really just like blue-red type card. The buyout of being able to say, okay, on turn 3, just plot this. I'll get the mana back later. It does kind of put your opponent in a tough spot, right? Your opponent's like, well, at some point they're just going to, you know, get one of their best spells back. You have to have good spells, but it works with the blue-red gold uncommon. Like it works with both of them. I don't know. I think this is going to be really good in blue-reds. At least in that deck, it should be good. It may not be good anywhere else, but I've moved it up here, just to give it a little bit of hopium, you know. Slickshot Vault Buster. 2 and a blue for a 1/4 vigilance. It gets +2/+0 as long as you've committed a crime this turn. So this looks nice, you know what I mean? When I talked earlier about, you know, the 0/5 blocker not being a 1/4, this card really sort of just does everything that card aspires to do. It actually presents an attack that is meaningful, and, you know, committing a crime is something you can do at instant speed semi-reliably, and so your opponent can't really block it, and yeah, it blocks well. It does stuff that's set mechanic adjacent. I don't think it's super powerful, it doesn't have an ETB, but I think it's a fine card. Spring Splasher. 1 and a blue for a 2/1. When it attacks, the target creature defending player controls gets -3/-0 until end of turn. So this does commit a crime, and it is a 2-drop, but I am still putting it into tier 5 because we are back in the world where 2/1s for 2 are not acceptable. In MKM they were acceptable as a result of the fact that your opponent was playing a 3-mana 2/2 a significant percentage of the time. This format, that will not be the case, so not excited about this one. Time Twister. 3 blue for a sorcery. Each opponent may shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library. Each player who does draw 7 cards, exile Step Between Worlds. You can pull out it for 4 blue. Yeah, I don't know. This is not good in limited. Giving your opponent a bunch of cards is not good. Plotting this card in limited is especially bad. Do not do this. It's just like, it's also a May trigger. Like it's just a disaster. Like there's no winning when you cast this card. Like you just are giving your opponent too many choices, and like it's just not where you want to be. Yeah. Stoic Sphinx. 2 blue for a 5/3 flash flying. It has hexproof as long as you haven't cast a spell this turn. So yeah, this is pretty good. It's going to be tough for your opponents to deal with it. Now, I think it's going to be more possible to deal with than, perhaps some people would lead you to believe. It is blockable as a flyer. There's a lot of reaches. I think there's like 4 or 5 3-mana 3/3 reach creatures in this set. Like, those creatures just destroy this. Like, this card does, like, your opponent plays one of those and you play this and you're just like, well, I guess I'm just extremely depressed because how do I ever beat that? And the answer is like, well, you don't. But it does have flash. It's going to play well in decks where you're, doing the thing. But again, I'm very skeptical of the like don't cast spells thing. Like not playing your spells is generally not a recipe for success. So obviously it's going to have hexproof on your opponent's turn. It's just at the beginning of their turn. So it's going to be difficult for them to interact with sorcery speed interaction. That's good. Right? Like, this is a good card, and I'm not saying it's bad, but there's a lot of warning signs that this card, I think some people are going to grade this card as, like, being a really, 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 like, super busted card, and I think there's a lot of warning signs that this, to me, doesn't read that way. We have a double pipped situation, we have a 3 toughness situation, we have your opponent having a little bit of, like, control over, like, you have like a I can't do this, like, play my game normally situation. So there's a lot of restrictions, like small micro restrictions on this that I think are going to hurt its performance in the aggregate, but in some matchups it's going to feel unbeatable. So that's how it is. Stop Cold. 3 and a blue for an enchantment. Enchant or a creature when Stop Cold enters the battlefield, tap enchanted permanent loses all abilities and does not untap during its control's untap step. So this is Tamio's whatever from Neon Dynasty. That card was pretty bad. I expect this to be pretty bad also. Just leaving your opponent with the thing, just the game object. There's like a couple of things that pick things up in this set. There's a couple of ways to like red-black is sacrificing stuff. I don't know. Not super excited about this. Take the Fall. Single blue mana for an instant. Target creature gets -1/-0 until end of turn. It gets -4/-0 instead if you control an outlaw and you draw a card. Yeah, I mean, this, it's, what is it called? Fleeting Distraction. Fleeting Distraction has been upgraded. But -4/-0 is pretty significant. Like, that is gonna make their thing not do any damage pretty much every time. And controlling an outlaw is pretty easy to do. You're going to be doing it in pretty much every one of your decks, even in blue. And even if you don't, the worst case scenario is it's a cantrip that gives your opponent's thing -1/-0, which is not a disaster. Now, again, not making the thing weaker means your thing's not trading up necessarily, but this is like a 2 spell per turn enabler. It just kind of does a lot of little things that I like, and I'm excited about, though I don't think this is like a super high priority. Key to the Vault. I'm going to read some lines of text on this card. The lines of text I will read are: 1 in a blue, equipment, equip 2 in a blue. Alright, we will be continuing on to the next card. This town ain't big enough. 4 in a blue for an instant. This spell costs 3 less to cast if it targets a permanent you control. Return up to 2 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. So this is a very interesting card, right? There are a lot of spots where it's going to be very, weird. It is overtly sort of powerful, right? It's, the bounce 2 things for 5 mana at instant speed, it's not something we see every time. And now there's a Run Ashore, which was 6 mana in call time that put 1 thing on top and 1 thing back to their hand. There is, Horses, which was a sorcery that bounced 2 things to their hand but gave you a significant amount of additional value. Scrying 1 and Ring Tempt was huge on that card. This card provides no additional value other than that it can be a lot cheaper if you are specifically trying to protect one of your things. This is a much better 2 mana protection spell than the other one that we saw at Common that was like the copy hexproof spell. I think this is a significantly better way to protect your creatures than that, and it just is much more flexible. I think it's okay. I'm not super excited about it. I think it's, certainly got its problems. But there's going to be situations where it's an absolute blowout, and some situations where you're going to be like, well, I guess I have to bounce one of my creatures to target their thing. And maybe it's just like a blowout enough of the time. I don't know. I'm just concerned about this maybe not being as modal as it looks. You know what I mean? 3 steps ahead. Single blue for a spree instant. It has an additional 1 in a blue to counter a spell. You can pay 3 additional mana to create a token that's a copy of another target artifact or creature you control, or you can pay, 2 to draw 2 cards and then discard. I really like this card. It's does a lot of cool things. It's very, modal and flexible. All of the modes are a little more expensive than you'd like to be paying, but that's okay. You're getting a lot of choice in how to use the modes, and it does sort of ostensibly look a lot like Mystic Confluence. Kind of looks like Mystic Confluence. 5 mana, counter a spell, draw 2 cards. It's close to that. It's kind of close to Mystic Confluence. That's making me want to move it to tier 1, but I don't know. Maybe I should just move it to tier 1. Maybe I should be brave. Maybe I should, be myself. Move it up to tier 1. I don't think it's going to be tier 1 on aggregate, just because, good players play better with counter spells than the average player, but I do think it's a really good card, and I'm really excited to play with this card, and I think it's sweet, so, yeah. And the last blue card, Visage Bandit. 3 and a blue for a 2/2. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature you control, except it's a shapeshifter rogue in addition to its other types. And it has plot for 2 and a blue. So this is another card where you're going to want to be plotting it pretty much every time. You're not super interested in playing 4 mana, clone your own thing that can also get disrupted because your opponent, in response, removes your stuff. Now, obviously, in response removing your stuff, angle happens a lot more when you plot it because they can see it coming. But you having a 0 mana creature up, your opponent can't exactly just hold up removal for the rest of the game because you're just going to eat away at their mana, right? Like, you have a 0 mana way to do something, your opponent has to spend, 2 mana per turn to, make sure you can't do that. It gets pretty bad for them pretty fast. So I think this is okay. I'm not super excited. I think it's, we've seen these clones of your best stuff tends to not be super amazing, but I do think, it doing double spell enabling is also enough of an upside to push it over the edge for me. And that's it. Those are the blue cards. That's my opinions on them so far. I hope you enjoyed. There is more of this set to come. I'm excited about the set, and I will see you next time.